Under the Ptolemies, Alexandria develops into a melting pot of cultures. From the exchange between Egyptians and Greek conquerors, something new emerges. Also, in matters of faith.
The goddess, whose origins can be traced right back to the earliest of times. And believing that Hathor dwelt in the cliffs of Deir el-Bahri, Montuhotep chose this site not only for his war cemetery, but for his own tomb complex. It was Montuhotep that first built here, in this dramatic place where the cliffs meet the desert. Believed to be the home of the goddess Hathor herself, it was a fast track to the afterlife. And for Montuhotep and his men, who'd lived and died by the war god Montu, they all now rest in the eternal embrace of Hathor. The first to build at Deir el-Bahri was Montuhotep, the founder of a reunified Egypt. He was so influential that almost 600 years later, female pharaoh Hatshepsut built her own funerary temple right next door to tap into the religious and political power of her illustrious predecessor. In the Middle Kingdom, life for ordinary people was on the up. Food was plentiful. Wealth and trade flourished. And farming was revitalised with new irrigation systems. Yet the Dark Age had nonetheless left its mark on the Egyptian mindset, as revealed in the way they prepared for the afterlife. In the Old Kingdom, tomb walls were often covered in elaborate scenes and texts, replicating an idealised version of the Egyptian world. But in the Dark Ages, people had seen their sacred sites ripped apart. So instead of such tomb art, many in the Middle Kingdom opted for its cheaper equivalent, with something much smaller and much more intimate. While these may look like children's toys, they were in fact made nearly 4,000 years ago to be placed inside Egyptian burials. Now, these wooden models were designed to provide the deceased with an eternal supply of food and drink in the next world. And so we have all the basics here, the Egyptian staples of bread, beer, and beef. So we have the bakers at this end, and they're grinding the grain to make flour, which will then be made into the bread loaves that are cooked in this fire. And the baker is in front there. The arms are quite damaged, but presumably shielding his face from the heat, as we know from other examples. Move to the middle, and we have the butcher here, and he's cutting the throat of this ox, and the legs are bound here to keep the animal in situ while the deed is done. And then we move on to the end, and we have the brewer. This is a fabulous, fabulous example, because he's pushing the mash through a sieve, and the sieve's even being drawn on there, on the top. Actually, in proportion with the rest of it, this individual's ordered rather more beer than either bread or beef, because this section of the model is almost half its length. But you can see the vats of beer carefully laid on their side. It's a wonderfully evocative piece. These people have been working for 4,000 years, and they're still at it. Look at them. The key elements of Egyptian culture were back, and they look little different from times of plenty in the previous millennium. Look at this busy crew grappling with the sail, poles ready to launch the boat off the Nile's banks. And this granary silo. Inside, workers haul sacks of barley while a scribe counts the crop. And of course, there are also female figures. In Egypt, women enjoyed much the same status as men, unlike their sisters in many other parts of the ancient world. They're also producing one of the Egyptian staples, but linen, the cloth, which was used to make pretty much every Egyptian garment. When you see this standing woman here, she's spinning the thread with this spindle. And the thread that she's busy making, she'll then hand on to her two companions here, the weavers, and they're using this horizontal loom that's pegged to the ground to produce the bolts of cloth which will be fashioned into the wraparound dresses, the kilts, the loincloths, as worn by pretty much every ancient Egyptian man, woman and child. The lives depicted in these busy little scenes are the comfortable and the familiar, representing the Egyptian idea of security. This isn't Tutankhamun's death mask, this isn't the finest piece of art you'll ever see, but that isn't the point. These are real people doing real jobs. This is ancient Egypt up close and personal. Order had been restored within Egypt, but the fears that once tore Egypt apart hadn't disappeared entirely. For now they were projected outwards, to the world beyond its borders. So Middle Kingdom monarchs, like stern old Sesostris III, focused on national security and wealth creation. Sesostris is infamous for his devastating military campaigns south into gold-rich Nubia. But he also opted for a more permanent kind of control by building castles. Now this is a map of southern Egypt and Nubia, which is modern-day Sudan, and where Aswan is, that was the border between the two. And Egypt maintained its control over Nubia through a series of forts. With around 8 of these built by Sesostris himself, these Middle Kingdom forts were within signalling distance of one another, along the southern Nile, down into Nubia. They were all part of a massive state building programme designed to subjugate the local population and maintain the flow of goods and people up into Egypt, particularly Nubian gold. Very few of these forts still survive. These are some of the last images ever recorded of the largest at Buhen. It was filmed in 1962 during its excavation. And after the creation of the Aswan Dam, these massive mud brick walls disappeared forever beneath the waters of the new Lake Nasser. But Buhen isn't completely lost to us because the excavation records are kept here at the Egypt Exploration Society, and they reveal an unexpected aspect of Middle Kingdom Egypt. As well as photographs, they hold architectural plans of the fort drawn up during the excavations, giving a real insight into the immense scale of the Egyptian crackdown in Nubia. Hiya, Chris.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good.
Oh, this looks like an amazing photograph.
Yeah.
What does it actually show?
Well, this is an aerial photograph, Joe. So what we can see here, along the bottom, this strip is actually the River Nile. And then right on the banks of the Nile, emerging from the sand here, we see this square outline of the massive fortification of the site of Buhen. But once the excavators began to uncover the full extent of what we could see, this is what they came across.
That just looks like a medieval castle, doesn't it? Very rarely do you think ancient Egypt, oh yeah, castles, and yet here is the evidence in front of us.
Absolutely.
Designed to keep the enemy out, Buhen shares features with the castles of Europe, but all constructed 3,000 years earlier. Most astonishing of all is its sheer size.
There's a little scale on this map, gives you an idea. This is roughly 100 metres. So just the Nile-facing wall here is well over 400 metres long. And if you think about the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza, that's 200 metres along the base. So we're talking about the length of two Great Pyramids along here. The total circumference of this wall is well over a mile. And the walls, these outer walls, are 11 metres high.
Inside which you could fit around 20 football pitches. Because as well as controlling the Nubian gold supply, Egypt intended to rule by intimidation.
This is the Middle Kingdom's great monumental architectural statement. Pyramids, monumental tombs, were not really the kinds of buildings they needed. What they very much needed were these heavily fortified fortress towns to guard the frontier of their territory. When this fortress arrives in the barren, empty desert landscape in the Middle Kingdom, this would have been a massive statement. Something very, very big, powerful, strong, scary has suddenly arrived in the desert.
So anybody travelling from Nubia north into Egypt has to sail past this, and this would have taken quite a while to sail past, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Imagine looking up, you're in a little boat on the Nile and you're looking up and up and up and up,
yep.
And you can see all these arrow slits, people training their arrows perhaps on you, just, you know you're being watched. It's that big brother mentality, isn't it?
Exactly.
Rising up by the Nile, Buhen was a gleaming citadel of power. But most of all, it was an early warning system, the eyes and ears of a nation defined by suspicion and fear. But Egypt's southern border wasn't the only one to be fortified. The northeastern border with Palestine was also secured with such defences to monitor the large number of foreign traders regularly travelling to sell their goods in super wealthy Egypt. And the visit of one such group is portrayed here on a tomb wall. A caravan of wealthy merchants and their families. Clearly not Egyptian, with their distinctive hairstyles and brightly coloured clothes. Known as the Amu people, they traded in such goods as the black lead ore, vital for Egypt's production of eye makeup. And their distinctive pottery has been found across the Nile Delta, where many of them settled to live and work among the Egyptians. But within a century, some of these Amu had infiltrated high office and eventually took over Egypt itself.
Now, these nomadic Amu people who came in and out of Egypt on a regular basis to trade are portrayed here in this wonderful tomb scene. And yet the most important part of the entire scenario are three small hieroglyphs right in the middle.
They reveal one of the other terms the Egyptians used to name the Amu.
It's basically a crook, a sceptre, and that's written with two symbols, and that's pronounced Heka. It means ruler. And then the third of the three symbols is kind of undulating uplands, which means desert or hill country. Basically, the Egyptians used this symbol to denote a foreign land, so you put these signs together, ruler of foreign lands. And this really is the clue to what happened next, because these Amu of Palestinian origin eventually became the Hyksos. The Hekahasut are the Hyksos, and they ruled Egypt from the north between 1650 and 1550 BC.
When the Nile River's banks overflowed, farming became difficult, and the men and women went to work on the king's projects. This labor was always rewarded, and no literary or physical evidence supports the assertion that any of Egypt's major monuments were erected by slave labor. Work building monuments like the pyramid and associated burial complexes, temples, and obelisks provided the peasantry with the sole possibility of upward mobility. Skilled painters and engravers in particular were in high demand in Egypt, and were paid more than unskilled laborers who merely hauled the stones for the construction from one location to another. Peasant farmers might also raise their status by learning a craft and producing the vases, bowls, plates, and other ceramics that people need. Skilled carpenters could make a fortune by making tables, desks, chairs, beds, and storage chests, while painters were needed to decorate upper-class dwellings, castles, tombs, and monuments. Brewers were likewise held in high regard, and breweries were occasionally controlled by women.